This is a trigger warning. This episode contains discussions of stalking, mental illness, and sexual abuse. It also contains spoilers for the Netflix series Baby Reindeer. In 2015, 20-something-year-old Donny Dunn was bartending at a pub in London. Donny had moved from Scotland to pursue a career in comedy. But things were not unfolding the way he had hoped. A series of traumatic events over the course of several years left Donny alone, living with his ex-girlfriend's mother and working at the pub while his comedy career was at a standstill. Though Donny was down bad, things were about to get a lot worse when a woman in her 40s sat down at his bar. Her name was Martha, and she seemed sad. Donny offered her a cup of tea on the house, a seemingly harmless act of kindness, because he felt sorry for her. This harmless act of kindness would change Donny's life forever. A convicted stalker, Martha became obsessed with Donny and relentlessly harassed him for the next 3 years. Though Martha's stalking starts to destroy Donny's life, he also finds some twisted comfort in it. This is the story told in Netflix's new series, Baby Reindeer. But it's also the real-life story of the series creator and star actor, Richard Gadd, aka Donny Dunn. From Centennial World, I'm Lauren Meisner, and this is Infinite Scroll, a podcast about internet culture, the creator economy, and how social media is shaping Gen Z. Welcome back to Infinite Scroll, everyone. So many of you guys said to me on Mini Scroll this week that you needed a Baby Reindeer deep dive. So that is what I am bringing you today, and I am bringing it to you with my brother, Nick. Say hi.
Hello.
Nick has never done a podcast before, so bear with him. But, he's like my little TV buddy. We literally spend every single night binge watching TV. So, of course, he watched Baby Reindeer with me, and I was like, I just need someone to talk with this about. Talk with this? No, talk with me. Talk with me.
I'm a very experienced TV watcher, so I'm glad I could bring my expertise.
Yes, I needed somebody to talk with me about this. So he is here. We're going to have I don't think I've actually ever had a guy on the podcast. So this is a first.
I hope I don't ruin it for all future men.
Why do men? All right. So as always, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. Please sign up to our newsletter, which is called Infinite Scroll. On Wednesdays, we send out a commentary article about a trend, creator drama, or news. And on Fridays, we round up the 5 biggest think pieces on the internet from that week. And also join our Geneva group, which is, of course, called Infinite Scroll, where you can chat with other people who are obsessed with internet culture and creator drama and tea, and you can chat with me. All right, I'm going to get into some reviews from this week. So Lauren DM'd Infinite Scroll Podcast on Instagram, and she said, "Hi, I'm not sure if you'll see this comment, but I just came across your podcast on TikTok today, and I'm hooked. I just want to let you know that I love your videos. Keep up the good work." Thank you, Lauren. I love that. I'm actually so glad that the TikTok is still going strong, because that was such a big marketing tool for us last year. And then I feel like when everything changed and I started co-hosting solo, it's just not hitting the same. So I am glad that there are still a few people trickling in from TikTok. All right. So this is going to be a bit of a throwback. This is not scripted. This is more like the episode that I did with Crystal, or previous episodes with Jordy, where we just have a bunch of things to talk about. So we're just going to get right into it. So first, I'm going to talk about what Baby Reindeer is. Okay, so as I said at the top of the episode, go watch it if you guys want to listen to this and you do want to watch it. If you don't have any intention of watching it, then just be warned, spoilers like crazy, and it is a very dark and twisted show. Okay, so Baby Reindeer is a new Netflix series written and starring comedian Richard Gadd. The show tells Richard's story of being relentlessly stalked by a random woman who just walked into the pub that he worked at in his 20s. Richard was living in London to pursue his comedy career, and because of several things going on in his life at the time, his self-esteem was very low, and though this woman was ruining his life, he became somewhat dependent on her attention. In the series, Richard's name is Donny, and his stalker's name is Martha. Martha tells tall tales. She claims to be a lawyer and always talks about this lavish life that she leads. And Donny immediately clocks that a lot of this is untrue because she can't even afford the cup of tea that he graciously gives her. And the actress who plays Martha is Jessica Gunning. So as per Netflix.com, quote, "While working his shift as a bartender, Donny shows an act of kindness to Martha, a customer whose vulnerability is readily apparent. But as the saying goes, no good deed goes unpunished, and this casual encounter sparks a suffocating obsession that threatens to wreck both of their lives and forces Donny to face his deeply buried trauma. While this type of storyline might seem familiar, it's important to remember that this isn't just a story, it's true. Since it did come from such a personal place, Gad consciously avoids the black and white, cliche, dense stalker narratives that have been done before, making sure that everyone's humanity remains intact. So the Netflix show is a loose adaptation of Richard's award-winning play of the same name, which he performed at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival in 2019. It also borrows elements from his 2016 one-man show called Monkey See, Monkey Do, which tells his story of sexual abuse while running on a treadmill pursued by a gorilla. And we will get to that sexual abuse later. Okay, so let's talk about the reception. It has just been receiving rave reviews everywhere.
Yeah, all my friends are watching it. Everybody's talking about it. Everyone loves it.
Yeah. So it has 85% audience rating on Rotten Tomatoes and 100% on critic reviews. It's rated 8 out of 10 on IMDb. It is viral all over TikTok. I have personally not seen a bad review. Have you?
No, I don't think so. I've only heard positive things.
Yeah.
Really.
And it's number 1 on Netflix right now in like most countries. So why do we think that Baby Reindeer is so special? Why is it so successful? Do you have any thoughts?
I mean, I think knowing that it's a real story is a big part of it because, and I think you're going to dive more into this later, but in terms of like the style, it's filmed very much like a horror movie or like a thriller or something like that, which like the anticipation is so much worse when you know it's like something that really happened to someone, I feel like, which is like both dark but also captivating, I think. Like it makes it that much scarier and also like makes you want to know what happened that much more.
I think part of it is that it's so difficult to dislike this show because it is real.
Yeah.
Like it's so authentic, it's so self-aware that it's almost impossible to criticize the plot because it's based on it's not even just based on a true story. Like at the beginning it literally says this is a true story, and we will get into the things that are true versus not in the show, but so much of it is true. So I think any criticism of the story itself has already been addressed by Richard in his writing of the story. It explores such difficult themes in such a nuanced way. It does such a great job of humanizing both Donny and Martha and everyone in the show except for that one evil man who we'll talk about in a bit. But Richard told Radio Times, quote, "When I was getting stalked, I saw someone who was unwell, needed help, was quite vulnerable. Stalking is a mental illness, and it comes from a sort of fantasy addiction of some kind. This idea that this person is the answer to all your problems, so you'll hear only what you want to hear and disregard the rest." And I feel like the fact that he is giving interviews, I mean, he was giving interviews similar to this back in 2019 when his play premiered at Edinburgh Fringe. Fringe.
Edinburgh Fringe.
But the way that he talks about his experience being stalked back then and up to now with the new series, it's so empathetic to Martha. He's so sympathetic to Martha, and you can tell that he's really worked through that experience and has come out the other side understanding, I suppose, a little bit of where she was coming from.
He's talked about it in like interviews that I've seen where he says he feels like she's someone who the system failed. And so he felt like, a lot of sympathy for her. Mm-hmm. Like she got left behind. It's a cycle, of trauma.
Mm-hmm. So then in terms of stylistic choices, like you said, it is paced so well. It's kind of like a horror movie. Shannon Keating for Vulture wrote, "Baby Reindeer is shot and scored like a horror movie with disconcerting, unflattering close-ups and off-kilter angles," which is like perfect. And that's what makes it so eerie and unsettling to watch, especially episode 4.
Yeah, I think like, especially early on too, like in the bar scenes, I feel like they did a lot of shots from like Martha's perspective looking at Richard, like kind of like zoomed in on his face from like the front of the bar and like vice versa, like him above like looking at her when she's sitting there like laughing with her like Diet Coke that she never drank.
Literally. Yeah, and the pacing is really good and it's really captivating. Even though it's like so dark and twisted, it's also kind of funny.
Yeah, for sure. There's lots of funny moments, like when his dad says good luck with the transsexual when he's on the train.
Yeah, but I think that this juxtaposition really mirrors like what is going on in Donny's psyche between this dark trauma that we'll get into in a minute that he has dealt with versus like what he's experiencing with Martha. For me, one of the funniest parts of the whole show was Martha's emails.
Oh yeah, for sure. That's like, I think that's such a big part of what made the show iconic.
Yeah, and those are real emails apparently.
Yeah, they're all of the emails seen in the show are allegedly sent from the real Martha.
Yeah, she would send hundreds of stream of conscious emails to Donny every day, and they were all filled with like grammatical and spelling errors. And it was almost like she was just typing them as fast as she was thinking, which I assume is why there was like spelling errors and stuff. All of them would sign off with some iteration of sent from my iPhone because she was trying to like uphold this facade that she had more money than she did, or she was more like well-to-do.
She was like a lawyer.
Yeah.
And she was like the right hand man of like some big politicians. I can't remember specifics.
Yeah.
But
Remember her Facebook, and she'd photoshopped herself into all these photos.
Yeah.
But like the best part was when you would read these emails on screen and they would say sent from my iPhone, and then they would start to like, as things progressed and she got more and more, I suppose, like desperate for his attention and love, they would say like sent from iPhone, and then it would just say like iPhone.
iPhone.
And then sometimes iPhone would be spelled iPhone. It was so good. And it is like, it's an unsettling show because you're watching it and you're finding things funny. Like now we're sitting up here laughing, but like it's also so sad and so dark. And I think Richard's done a good job of balancing that in the press that he has done. Like he is aware that he's making an entertaining show, but he's so, like I said before, sympathetic to Martha. So I think everything that we're saying when we're laughing too is like with that as well, like that air as well. Okay, and then I think the final thing that makes Baby Reindeer so special is the narrative element, like the fact that we are basically inside Donny's head with his own POV the whole time. I think Richard was so willing to fully open himself up for this narration. Like he's just so raw and honest that it's almost unnerving, and it kind of makes you question his psyche, but it's like also refreshing to hear someone be so self-aware.
You get like such a deep look inside of his head, but at the same time, like in doing so, realize that he's like very unwell in many ways, especially like early on in the story. Having like nervous anticipation while you're like from his point of view about what even he's gonna do. You know what I mean? Like what unhinged choices he's gonna make.
Yes, like those first 3 episodes, you kind of are questioning like, why is he entertaining Martha? What does he get out of this? What is going on with his internal psyche to make him be okay with this? I mean, he's cracking like sexual jokes. Like I know he's kind of doing it to appease the guys at work, but he's like feeding into it a little bit with the people in his life and to her. And then you're kind of like, what is going on? Why would he do this? And then episode 4 happens.
Yeah, I think like early on in the show, like the first 3 episodes, as we've been discussing, like you just assume it's based in like the gender roles. This older woman stalking this like younger fit man. You just assume he's not taking it seriously because there's no like
physical threat.
Exactly.
So yes, episode 4 is where things start to click into place, and the show opens with him going to the police. And so you think, okay, he's reporting like every single thing that has happened. And then you find out that's not the case. And you're like, why has he not been reporting the extent of what Martha's been doing to him? Why did it take him 6 months to report this? What is going on? And then we are transported years back to Donny's life at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, where he meets a director named Darian. So Darian takes a liking to Donny's cheesy style of comedy and convinces him that he will be a star so long as they work together. Donny starts spending more and more time at Darian's house, quote unquote, working on his career. And this is where Darian grooms Donny by getting him to experiment with increasingly harder drugs during these working sessions. And then when they come down and Donny goes home, he'll send him all these like crazy rewrites to do. And he's up at all hours, like trying to do all this unpaid work essentially for Darian. So while Donny is all, messed up on drugs at Darian's house, Darian starts sexually abusing him. Donny is aware that this is happening, so we see him wake up with Darian's hands down his pants a few different times, but he keeps going back because he is just so enraptured with Darian's promises, presumably.
I think he speaks to it like a bit in the show when he's having his like breakdown on stage where he like trauma dumps. I think he talks about like he's just doing it for the reason, he's doing all of it like to get big in comedy, get famous.
I think if you have ambitions to be somebody in the public eye or to be especially a comedian where basically your whole job is to be validated, right? Is to get people to laugh and clap at you. I can imagine that you have that fame bug. So to have somebody who is high up in the industry that you look up to, who's successful, who is giving that to you, who's clapping for you and saying, I believe in you, you're going to be successful when we're going to do this together, it would be intoxicating. So Shannon Keating writes for Vulture, quote, Donny is trapped both by Martha's real-time surveillance and the emotional after effects of Darian's abuse in that strange red room. Donny's narration is more important than ever in episode 4 because it helps the audience understand the complexities of this dynamic and why he keeps going back. He is very open about the mistakes that he's made throughout the situations with Darian and Martha. That's not something we see depicted very often in media. And for me, though I can't relate to the experiences that he's had, it was relatable to me that he was going through something so horrific, so traumatic, where he was so clearly the victim and he was still looking for the reasons why he wasn't. And Crystal and I were talking about this the other day because I don't remember what I was saying to her, but I was like, but it was probably my fault. And she was like, Lauren, this is the millennial curse. We were raised by boomers where nothing was their fault. And we have swung so far back the other way where millennials are always searching to make sure that we have our own like accountability and responsibility. And we're always trying to take responsibility for stuff that has happened to us, that it's like almost going too far. And I kind of saw a little bit of that in him, not necessarily with Martha, because I think he did a good job of explaining where he was with that, but with the Darian stuff, I just think he didn't cut himself enough slack.
It's just from a narrative standpoint when you're in your own mind, right? You're like, you're just thinking about the just different decisions you could have made.
Yeah, true.
You know what I mean? So I think like from an outsider perspective, absolutely. I don't think anyone should blame Darian. I hope no one's blaming Darian.
Donny.
Oh, go back in time, please.
That's okay. We know what you meant.
Okay.
We will blame Darian.
Please blame Darian.
Yeah.
No, I don't think anyone like should or would really blame Donny like for what happened to him. But I think when you're dealing with trauma and you're trying to like, reevaluate what happened and even like what you could change for the future potentially, like you end up assigning a lot of blame to yourself.
This show shows the complexities of trauma really well. And I think it's quite common for someone who has been abused to go back to their abuser.
Yeah. Like I think as we'll see later, like it's very easy to fall back into like the same role you had when you're with like in a similar situation, in a similar setting. Like I think like all humans fill a certain role in a given situation, and that's like quite fluid. Donny was the helpless understudy being like propped up emotionally by this, or career-wise, by this like more powerful man. So it's just like an easy role to fill.
Yeah, so Richard told Radio Times, quote, a lot of abuse happens in power dynamics, work dynamics, relationship dynamics, all of those kinds of things. I hadn't really seen the psychological complexity of it too often on television, and I really wanted to show the perniciousness of the grooming cycle just as much as the abuse cycle. Abuse survivors can feel just as much shame about the idea of feeling duped or the idea of feeling manipulated. One of the things that was left with me after everything was, God, I just feel so stupid. I think being so honest, not just about the assault, but how it got to that point, I hope will provide comfort for people who are maybe going through the same thing. So we wanted to touch on kind of the gender roles here. You mentioned it a little bit before about how seeing a man get stalked by a woman is maybe not as common, or it's not something like when you hear the word stalker, like, I mean, at least I think a man. Yeah. But I think when it relates to episode 4 and the sexual abuse that Richard endured, or Donny endured in the show, it's unique in that it represents male sexual violence in such an acclaimed and mainstream piece of media. And it's exactly what, Richard said in that quote that I just read that he hoped it would achieve. because I think it has achieved that. And I mean, I'm assuming, or I'm sure that a lot of the fears that men have if they have been sexually assaulted is that they won't be believed, or they'll be looked at as less of a man, or they'll be looked at like it's not serious, you probably enjoyed it, or whatever I presume is typically the response that a man would fear that they would get. So to depict this so, like, it was so jarring to watch. It was so difficult to watch. They did such a good job at showing how dark and seedy and fearful and just horrific that experience would have been. I can imagine would be healing for a lot of people, not just men, but like trauma survivors in general, sexual assault survivors in general. And I was watching a YouTube video where it was a man speaking about this show about Baby Reindeer, and he was saying, I hope that this doesn't get co-opted by us, by men, as like a story about a man's sexual assault. Like, this should be representative of all sexual assault. But I do think we see so little when it comes to men in media, so I think there's like a place for both.
That is fair. I understand where he's coming from, like, not to co-opt it. I think like the main way in which that would be used would be like whataboutism. If people were like talking about sexual assault against women, people were like, Baby Reindeer.
Remember Baby Reindeer?
Remember Baby Reindeer? But I think just like with anything, as we're realizing in society, I think increasingly over the years, like, representation matters. It is a very good thing for male survivors of sexual assault to see a man deal with that and then receive like overwhelming support.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because then they know like, oh, me too. Sorry, not in the hashtag me too
Yes,
sense,
yes.
but like a little girl sees a woman become an astronaut, like that makes them realize it's a potential path for them.
Yeah.
A man who's a survivor of sexual assault can see like the reception that Richard received and realize like, oh, that's like a potential path for me as well.
Yeah.
Like to open up about it and receive support.
Yeah, and hopefully this show becoming so famous is a good gateway for other men like who are watching it to see this can happen to us, and like we need to support our friends. We need to support the boys.
Yeah. And I guess like it can also maybe help like men empathize with women who have experienced sexual assault as well, because they can see like someone in their shoes.
Yeah, they did such a good job of depicting it, which is obviously very tragic, but it was very, very well done. So I guess when it comes to the stalking, though, like sticking with the gender role discussion at the moment, do you think that her being a woman plays a bigger role in him seeing it as like harmless at first? Is that why he kind of like leans into it? Or is it because he has been through, which we discover in episode 4, such violent abuse that his tolerance for abuse is completely skewed now?
Yeah. I think like it's mostly the latter, which I think we've discussed a bit off podcast. But basically, like, my impression at the beginning of the show was he's not taking it seriously in large part because she's an older woman. But I think, once you watch episode 4, that's when like things really click into place, because you realize like, and I think he says it himself a bit when he goes to like, when he finally does go to report her to the police, the irony of reporting her and not Darian is not lost on him. So like, I think he has a hard time viewing what Martha did as like particularly serious or that bad when he has been, as you said, like victimized so terribly by Darian. Like the magnitudes don't line up at all. So it's like, it seems trivial in comparison. So like, why would he make a big deal out of this and not do something about Darian?
And Donny's self-awareness throughout being groomed and abused has led to a lot of dialogue online about the realities of abuse, complex trauma, and what constitutes a quote-unquote victim. The show explores concepts of victimhood throughout, especially in the character of Terry, his girlfriend, played by trans actress Nava Mao, who almost reflects his inner monologue back to him in real life. So he tells us, the audience, I'm feeding into this, I'm doing this because, you know, I like the attention or whatever. He's telling us this, I'm not a victim. And then she's telling him when they're fighting, you're not a victim. And she also confronts him for not reporting the worst details to the police about what Martha has done. So I feel like she's the voice of reason to the audience, but also in his life. And she's like reflecting this self-awareness back to him.
I can agree with that. But I think like on one hand, he is using like the fact that he's a victim almost as an excuse at times, saying why he's not dealing with things to Terry. But on the other hand, like, he is a victim. I think it's just a great indication of the fact that like Richard writes it so like not black and white. It's not clear where like the lines of victim or enabler begin and end.
Yeah, and that's what Richard said in an interview. I didn't write down the quote, but he was saying that's what he thinks has made the show so successful, is that it is controversial, because there is that blurry line of like, where does this begin and where does it end?
Yeah.
And I think it was really brave of Netflix and Richard to explore the story from this more like nuanced perspective. And in an interview with The Guardian from 4 years ago, actually, about the play that the show is based off of, Richard said he would not have been able to make the art piece that he had until he had accepted his role in the stalking relationship with Martha. So he said, quote, "I hadn't quite grasped it yet. If I'd rushed it a year ago, it would have just been a victim narrative. And everyone would have come out saying, oh, you're so brave and well done for doing this. It would be unfair to say she was an awful person and I was a victim. That just didn't feel true." And then he further elaborated on this accountability to Bridges GQ earlier this month. He said, quote, "We live in a time where everyone's trying to be perfect. It's interesting when someone holds their hands up and says, I made some mistakes. There was a version of the show I was going to do in 2019 that made me look good, where I offered her a cup of tea and oh, woe is me. But that felt disingenuous, and the second you start to write art from a place where you're lying, I don't think the art's going to be any good." So all of this leads back to why Donny did not report Martha to the police sooner, and when he finally did, why he didn't report the most horrible things that she'd actually done. And to what you said before in the show, he says, quote, "I couldn't stand the irony of reporting her, but not him," as in Darian. "There was always a sense that she was ill. She couldn't help it, while he was a pernicious manipulative groomer. To admit to her was to admit to him, and I hadn't admitted him to anybody yet." And we were saying before, like, this show, it's hard to analyze because it really is just the telling of this man's trauma story. And they just give it to us so raw and so real on, this platter basically, and we take it, and that's kind of the point.
I wanted to talk about how I think the bingeability of the way like Netflix generally releases their content, like the fact that this was released all at once, like played to the show's favor. The fact that it kind of came off almost like a horror movie or like a thriller movie was a big strength to me. I was captivated, like anticipating the whole time.
I'm sure that he wrote it like that. And it is like almost having the first act of a play. And then if you want to take that intermission after episode 4, which we did, we watched the first 4 in one night and then watched the next 3. And you can kind of digest it. You get an answer as to what's kind of going on in the first 3 episodes when you watch episode 4. And then you can watch the back half in a totally different light, as if it's like the second act of a play. It is, but that's the thing. It was a play. Like, he's actually like a playwright. So Fair. It makes sense that he wrote it like that. I agree. It was very impactful. It wouldn't have been as powerful, I think, if it was released week to week.
Also, I want to say like how good Jessica Gunning did as Martha. She was so believable. I never thought about her in terms of the actor at all. Whenever I was watching Martha, whenever Jessica Gunning was on the screen portraying Martha, like I just thought of her as Martha.
Yeah.
Like she did such a good job portraying, like in some ways like a relatable, or maybe not relatable, sympathetic, but like deeply unwell person.
I agree with that. There was a few moments throughout the series where I would watch her and I would have to remind myself that she wasn't the actual stalker. Like, True. Because it was obviously actually Richard, actually Donny. But I had to remind myself that he was not playing opposite the person that this actually was, but it was so believable. And he did such a good job as well. Yeah. Like, he was such an incredible actor. I just can't believe that he was able to portray his own trauma like that and relive it like that for the show.
Between like Jessica's performance and like the writing in the second half of the show, everywhere Richard went, I was like feeling dread that Martha would be there. I was just like, oh God, is she going to be here? Like in every scene. Like,
but they also
just like waiting for her to pop up.
But they also did a good job of us, at least for me, like feeling comforted by Martha too.
Yeah.
Like, I also enjoyed her presence, which was fucked up. And like, they did such a good job of us understanding as the audience what Donny would have been feeling, where it's like that mix of dread and also like comfort and anticipation and kind of wanting to see her. So that kind of leads us to the ending, because there are a lot of questions about the ending and theories about the ending. So for a refresher, the series ends with Martha being convicted and Donny going to Darian's house to presumably confront him. But they end up having a chat and Darian offers Donny a job. Donny accepts. He leaves and is very upset, so he actually starts listening to Martha's voicemails while he walks through the streets of London. He goes into a pub, orders a drink at the bar by himself, and listens to a voicemail where Martha explains why she calls him Baby Reindeer. Because when she was little, she had a stuffed animal of a baby reindeer that gave her comfort while her parents fought. She says Donny looks like that baby reindeer. So it ends with Donny not having his wallet, and the bartender is giving him the drink on the house because he's crying and upset as he listens to this voicemail. And it's like a complete mirror of what happened between him and Martha. So the final frame is Donny teary-eyed, looking at the bartender, almost horrified. And I feel like it's that last look that he gives the bartender that has drawn so many questions about like what that meant. There's so many people that are like, oh, now he's going to get obsessed with the bartender like Martha did. Other people saying that they've realized that it's his moment of realization that anyone could end up in Martha's position with the right, quote unquote, unfortunate circumstances.
Yeah.
Which I think is probably closer to what it is. I don't think it's insinuating he's about to start stalking the bartender.
That would be crazy, though, if they came out with a season 2 and it was Donnie stalking the bartender. They were
plot
like,
twist, it kept going.
Yeah. Or he was just like, they abandoned the fact that it was a real story, and now it's just like a cycle of trauma where one person stalks. And the end of the second season, that bartender stalks another bartender.
Yeah, literally. What do you think the ending means?
I mean, yeah, I think the latter for sure. Like that he is coming to the realization that like he's in a position that Martha was in, and like how easy it would be to like grasp on to like any little act of kindness.
Yeah.
I think Richard said that in an interview that you quoted earlier or something like that. People who are stalking people are like viewing it as something like much greater than it is. Like it's often like that person is the solution to my problems. Like if I'm with them or when I'm with them, they interpret them to be together. Like it solves everything.
Yeah. I think also it's Donny realizing that now Martha is his baby reindeer.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
That's a
I
good
think
point.
him listening to why Martha calls him baby reindeer and therefore becomes obsessed with him because he reminds her of this comfort that she had as a child. And in his time of vulnerability and upset and need after he leaves Darian's house and, you know, is presumably upset about how the interaction went and ended up going back to his abuser and kind of having like a cordial conversation with him and accepting a job from him, his way to soothe himself was to listen to Martha as his comfort. And then I think sitting there in that bar, he just saw himself and Martha like just mirrored back to each other.
Yeah. I think like the first theory, it's fun. Like
He's going to start stalking him.
People are having fun with it, but like I don't think it really matters what happens after that. Like I think it's about like I think the ending is like the most sympathetic, although I think it's like fairly sympathetic to Martha throughout, but I think the ending is like the most sympathetic point to Martha. Like it's not just his realization, right? It's like showing us the viewer
Why she is the way she is.
this could happen to anyone. We've seen what Donnie went through and we're like, that's so fucked up. Like we totally get why he is messed up, right? We didn't see anything about like Martha's past or anything like that. We just see like a stalker and we're like, ew, gross. Like
Crazy.
crazy. But there's like a story to it. Richard has said in interviews that the real Martha, his real stalker, he viewed them as like failed by the system. You know, like they fell through the cracks of society. It's just showing the cycle of trauma continuing, right?
I wonder if the voicemails that we listened to her leave him in the show are real. Like, I understand they're not obviously her own voice.
That's a good point.
But I wonder if that baby
question.
reindeer story is real or if Richard put it into the narrative because he is trying, like, he so deeply understands where Martha was coming from, his actual stalker, I mean, and he wanted us to not leave the show angry at her or feeling a certain type of way about her. Like if he wanted us to be empathetic towards her as well.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought about if that voicemail is actually true. I obviously don't think that he listened to that specific voicemail. I mean, I guess it's possible, but I don't think like
In that
narrative-wise,
specific
it's like so perfect.
Yeah,
Like I
yeah.
don't really buy it, but whether or not that voicemail happened, like it gets the point across.
Yeah, I've seen some criticism of the ending. I will say that's kind of the one thing that people have criticized because everything else kind of is either true or it makes sense to the plot. Martha's stalking had to end somehow for the show to wrap up. So her being convicted even though it's unclear if she's convicted in real life. That was a good plot device. But the ending, I've seen some people say it was just like a little bit too cheesy. Like it was just too on the nose.
I think it finalizes like the message of the whole show. To see yourself fall back into that role of a victim when as soon as you're like confronted with like that similar situation, I think like must be so traumatizing. Probably makes you relive the trauma, like feel like have it all come back up again. He wants to show explicitly that trauma that he then re-experiences like is what leads people to do the things that Martha did.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about reality versus Netflix. So what was real and what was not? This is definitely not a comprehensive list, but these are just kind of the things that I felt were important to note, interesting to note, that kind of stuff. So the first is that, of course, we know that the show is based on Richard's real life experience with a woman who stalked him for years. Though in this series, he reports her and she goes to jail. That part is not confirmed. Richard has said that he is not worried about her coming back, though.
Yeah, which I think has led to a lot of speculation that she's passed away.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
Who
Not
knows?
like anything confirmed, but just questions
No.
of like, if he's so sure about this and he's put out this series and she's not in jail, why is he certain she won't come back?
Yeah, especially since, and I think maybe it touches on it later, but he talked about how it was not that cut and dry in real life. Like I think when he was about to premiere the 2019 show for the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. Fringe, not Finge. I think in interviews leading up to that, he said it had only recently resolved, which would make the timeline much longer. I've also seen certain articles saying like he was stalked on and off for 10 years, which we don't know the exact timeline, but that would mean like up to at least like probably 2022, if that's true. Who knows?
Yeah, I heard he said 10 years he said the better part of 10 years in an interview that I was reading. As we mentioned, all the emails shown in the series are real emails he received from his stalker. Over the course of the years, she sent him more than 41,000 emails, voicemails totaling 350 hours, multiple social media messages, and 106 pages of letters. Wild.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense now why there were so many typos in her emails, right? Like you can't
True,
you can't be spell checking. I mean, but shouldn't she just have spell checking? Well, regardless, you can't be spell checking that many emails, like, and being able to send them all off, you know?
Yeah, you can't send hundreds of emails a day with like perfect grammar.
Truly stream of consciousness.
Yes. Okay, so Martha's email in the show, this is some interesting tea. So Martha's email in the show is ma4815162342 The number sequence in Martha's email is not random, however. Some internet sleuths have discovered that it is the cursed numbers, quote unquote, from the show Lost. So I guess Harley and Lost, I didn't watch Lost and neither did you. Did you? No. I feel like we were just like a little bit too young. Like I remember mom and dad watching it.
Yeah, I do. I do remember Dad watching it. I think like it came on too late for us. I would only catch it like, I don't know if that's even true though. At least the beginning, I think we were too young for, and by then you like kind of missed the boat.
Yeah. So Harley and Lost, he played this sequence of numbers in the lottery and he won, but ever since his life went downhill, and so he believes that this sequence of numbers specifically are cursed. So this has led to questions like, why would he have chosen those numbers for her email? Was the real life Martha obsessed with the show Lost? Is Richard Gadd obsessed with Lost? Is he saying that since he met Martha, his life went downhill? Another really rogue internet theory is that the real life Darian actually worked on the show Lost. I don't believe that. I think that's too obvious, probably.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I feel like it's probably more that he was a fan of the show Lost. Like Richard Gadd is a fan of the show Lost.
Yeah.
And ever since Martha came into his life went downhill.
Yeah, I could see that being like a fun Easter egg. I think like it's also entirely possible that Martha had her email be that.
You think that was her real email?
No, that had included those numbers.
No. I think that's too obvious because he's just gone on this huge press tour that he's changed so much about Martha. There's no way we'd ever find her. Although we do kind of know that's not totally true.
Yeah, I don't think he changed that much, to be honest.
I mean, he might have, but people have found a woman who is very similar to Martha. We're not going to say her name because we don't want to dox anyone, but people think they know who the real Martha is. And there are a lot of similarities if it is true. So he really didn't change that much.
Yeah, although now he is very publicly asking people to please not look for the individuals from the show, especially because there is a man who like the internet has decided, as far as I know, with no proof, that
Is
he is Darian.
Yeah.
And I can only imagine that would be pretty awful if you were not Darian and you were being accused of being Darian. Like Darian is the worst.
He's like literally the number one villain of the show.
Yeah.
Another kind of reality versus Netflix thing is Terry was a real person. She was a real trans woman that Richard was seeing at the time. He said, quote, "It was very important to have Terry be the voice of reason in the show. I mean, she was the voice of reason in my life at that point as well. Not that I listened to her as much as I should have." I thought that was cute. Terry was my favorite. She was the breakout star for sure.
Terry was the best.
Yeah.
I think
she was such a comforting presence. Like every time she was on the screen, I was like, oh, thank God.
it was so hopeful when she was there.
Yeah.
You were like, wow, Richard's life, or sorry, Donny. I guess
Donny,
either way,
Yeah.
Donny's life might not be so bad. Like, if he's with Terry, like it could be good.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like he talked about when he did the YouTube video, which wasn't real, or he didn't do a YouTube video. Sorry, when he like trauma dumped onto an audience at like a comedy competition and it went viral. He said like he hated himself more than he loved her.
Oh,
which
yes.
is like very sad and also like kind of relatable again to like just to like that millennial curse you were talking about, like you and Crystal were talking about.
Yeah.
Like I have not dealt with trauma like Richard has to that extent, but that part is just like very relatable. I think to most people, probably everyone has some self-hatred and has like sabotaged themselves or like good things in their life due to that self-hatred. I can't speak to his exact experiences, but if you're in a place like him where he felt like he couldn't connect with people. If you remember, there's a point in the show where he's like dating a bunch of different people after he had tried in a very unsuccessful way to deal with his trauma. Or not tried to deal with it, but maybe just like indulged. I'm not sure. But he basically like started hooking up with tons of people and stuff like that. Then after that, he began trying to date again. And he said like he couldn't connect to people. He didn't feel like he could relate until he met Terry.
Yeah.
But up until that point, very roundabout way of saying this, but he was not feeling any like super strong emotions in his life. Going through the motions, not connecting emotionally with people.
Like numb.
Yeah, numb. Thank you. That's a perfect word. Like he was very numb. So I think like self-hatred is a strong emotion. Sometimes it's good to feel any strong emotion.
So the final like Netflix versus reality thing that I wanted to touch on is that there was no trauma dump about Darian and Martha on stage. And as you mentioned, no ensuing viral video. But there were two moments that did inspire this in his real life. So in 2011, he went on an unscripted rant during a stand-up segment about the struggles of comedy. And during the technical rehearsal before the first performance of his one-man show, Monkey See, Monkey Do, which, as I mentioned at the top, was about his sexual abuse, he said that he was cracking up because it was going so badly. And the producer asked him, "What do you want from this man?" And Richard turned to him with tears in his eyes, and he said, "I just want to make it out alive." And then Richard did receive amazing reviews, amazing reception from this one-man show, which is kind of similar parallels to the reception that he had from the viral video. Like his career started to take off, and that's essentially what happened after 2019 Fringe Festival.
Yeah, and just realizing that telling people about his trauma, like they were accepting of it.
Yeah.
And like it was like a weight lifted off his shoulders, I think.
Okay, so the couple repercussions of the show to end off. We already touched on this a little bit, but like there's so many theories as to who the real Martha and the real Darian are. We won't go into the theories on Martha because he has not publicly mentioned any names. But Richard did post something about director Sean Foley on his Instagram stories yesterday. And that's the man that you were talking about before.
Yeah.
So he wrote, "Hi, everyone. People I love, have worked with, and admire, including Sean Foley, are unfairly getting caught up in speculation. Please don't speculate on who any of the real life people could be. That's not the point of our show. Lots of love, Richard." So Sean was like pretty high up in the kind of theater art world, and he stepped down from his position around the same time, allegedly, that the show came out or was,
Or it was
scheduled to come
announced.
out.
That
Yeah,
he was
like
stepping
announced.
Down. Like he could, like, no one knows.
Yeah. So people were like, oh, it's got to be him. So yes, they have asked continually, please don't speculate. I mean, unsurprising. That's the number one thing that people care about is like who these people are. But I also understand what he's saying. Like, that's not what the story is about. And I've seen a lot of criticism of people think he's kind of done Martha dirty because they think that he hasn't actually covered up a lot of the details and that it's like pretty easy to find her, even though he painted her in this sympathetic light. It's like, if you really had this sympathy for her, why would you make this show? And it's like, well, my opinion is he's allowed to tell his story.
Knowing what has happened now, I think like it may have been a misstep to use the real emails.
And some of the real references. Like
Yes.
there are
maybe not
things
the
that
emails specifically, but the references. Like
yes, there are things that they referenced in the show that people have found online of like this woman that they think is her tweeting about them or messaging about them. So it's like, well, it's lining up. Do we think that this series is a continuation of him being wrapped up in Martha still? Because that is another kind of piece of criticism I've seen is, you know, is this just another way for him to stay attached to her?
maybe. I feel it's not a fair criticism of like his morality, someone dealing with their trauma. You're criticizing like how well someone's dealing with their trauma or whatever, like not anyone's place.
Yeah,
like,
true.
Whatever. Who cares?
Yeah, that's fair enough for sure. And I mean, it's done more good. It's done so much good that I think it's, like you said, it's not really anyone's place to police where he's at with his relationship with Martha and the whole situation.
Even if they're like, wow, Richard, your relationship with Martha is still so unhealthy. He's like, yeah, I'm fucked up. Like, what do you want from me?
True.
My life was very traumatic.
Okay, so would we recommend it?
Absolutely. If you're a fan of thrillers, psychological shows, horror,
Drama.
black comedy,
Yeah.
it's totally worth it, I think. Like, it's a great show.
It's no Housewives, but it'll do.
No. It can't, it can't compete with the real drama of the Salt Lake City Housewives.
Exactly. Queens. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for listening to Infinite Scroll. I hope that this was at least somewhat interesting and fun. I haven't done like a deep dive into a show or a movie or a series in so long, so might be a little bit rusty, but hopefully it was good. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. It helps me so much. It makes my day when I read your reviews, and it helps me grow. And I will talk to you guys next week. Bye.
Bye.